So let's begin with our presentation. Today, I will be talking about gender equality in climate action. I will give you an Atwoodian analysis of Gilead and India. Gilead is actually a fictional state in The Handmaid's Tale, which is a book written by Margaret Atwood. And India is a country that I belong to, a rising democracy, a melting pot of diverse cultures, ideas, and people, and not to forget, a major region that is being affected by climate change. These are the contents of my study. I will be taking you through the introduction, methodology. We'll be talking about the major similarities and differences in Gilead and India. We'll also take a look at the results of a survey that I conducted on gender and climate change. And with this, let's move on to why I took up this issue in the first place. So you see that The Handmaid's Tale is a marvelous depiction of the experiences of women in relation to their environment, spaces, and surroundings. And that's, like according to my opinion, since I have read the book and also watched the series, I believe it makes a pretty good case for, you know, showcasing the viewer that how women actually navigate and kind of their own experiences when in, spaces and how they actually see their, environment. So with this, I actually got interested in taking up this issue as it relates to the theme of reprogramming history. As I believe the history, if we don't learn from the past, and also the past that is shown in The Handmaid's Tale, we are condemned to repeat the mistakes that were made during this time in the book, as well as also the kind of things that are happening in our world today when we look at the fight against climate change. So the story Atwood actually narrates in her book has resonated with people across the world, for it depicts a story of common people, women like you and me. Even though it was written back in 1985, now more than 30 years have passed. But the kind of themes that are explored in the book, like the utopia, dystopia angle, and also the political climate that is shown, the poor treatment of women and other minorities, the strict regimes. These are the kind of themes that still are very relevant even today. And I mean, if you look around yourself, you might agree with me that not much seems to have changed when it comes to this. I also believe that there is a clear connection between women's rights and climate change. This has also been explored in the novel as well as the series, as both are set during a time when there was an ecological crisis, which led to fertility decline, and that actually paved the way for a right wing, white supremacist, patriarchal, and theocratic regime to crack down on women's rights and bring a series of laws that suppress freedom and democracy. So, this is, of course, a piece of speculative fiction, and The Handmaid's Tale is actually a science fiction, dystopian novel that has been written from a female perspective, which makes it all the more interesting. And since like a lot of books haven't been written on the female perspective of dystopian world, so that is, I believe, the main aim with which Margaret Atwood wrote this book. And she herself was inspired by George Orwell's book, The 1984. And with this, I think one more reason why it's very important is because, like, if you look at the consequences of climate change, you will understand that it can actually, really make a huge change in our life. It can disrupt our daily life, and even with the pandemic, that has happened, in a way. So we are not talking about small changes. We are talking about big changes that are going to have big impacts on us if we do not act in the face of injustice and climate denial. So with this, I would like to also talk about the aims that I have with this study. So in this backdrop, I would like to address the widening of divisions in our society due to the climate crisis. I will be drawing parallels between the novel's treatment of environmental crisis with that of real-life state of affairs in India. We will try to understand the concerns or relationships of people, especially young Indian women, with their environment. We'll also explore reproductive rights, sexual surveillance, women's safety, access to resources, ecofeminism, and environmental movements that are shaping up in India over time. With this, I hope you get an interesting peek into the concerns of Indian women for their environment, and you might feel motivated to read or even watch The Handmaid's Tale. Though I believe books are always better, in terms of this case. And then you can, of course, watch the TV series as well. And with this, let's talk about the methodology. I have used secondary sources of data like online articles, books, research papers, relevant UN reports. For the various ecofeminist and environmental movements that we'll be talking about, these were set, like two of them, the Chipko movement and the Narmada Bachao Andolan, happened in the 1970s and 1980s, whereas I have also taken up two recent movements like the climate strikes that happened in 2019 in India and also the RA forest protests that happened in 2019-20 respectively. For the Gender and Climate Change Survey, there were 53 people who participated in the online survey. in the age group of 18 to 40, mostly college students and working professionals from across India. The survey actually included a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions to gauge the awareness experiences of people about climate change, environment, and etc. So with this, let's move on to the study area. So here you can see we have two maps. One is of Republic of India and one is of Republic of Gilead as portrayed in the Handmaid's Tale. The second map is actually a map made by the fans of Handmaid's Tale, and it's not like a proper actual map. It is just a portrayal of what the Republic of Gilead might look like if we actually imagine it in the reality in the real world. So first, let's take a look at India. India is officially known as the Republic of India. It is a country in South Asia, and New Delhi is the capital. India is also the second most populous democracy in the world and the largest democracy with over 1.3 billion people as of 2018. The median age in India is 28 years. It is on path to become the youngest country in the world in the coming years. India is also poised to surpass China in terms of population, but with rising urbanization and movement of people from rural areas to urban cities, there have been some changes in the lifestyle of people. As per World Economic Forum, India's fertility rate has halved since 1980, and that too especially in urban areas. Also, if we see the fertility rate and if we're talking about the demographics, then as of today, on an average, an Indian mother will have two children, whereas back in the 1950s, that was not the case. Back then, she would have 5 to 6 children. So there has been, gradual change in that as well. The growth in the population is thus expected to further slow down. But despite all of this, India will definitely hold the title of most populous country by 2027. Geographically, we are surrounded by the Indian Ocean, on the south, the Arabian Sea in southwest, and the Bay of Bengal on the southeast. India has a diverse geography. We have a vast coastline of 7,000 kilometers. We have various landforms, plateaus, beaches, numerous rivers, deserts, and we also have the Himalayan mountain ranges in the north. We have a rich biodiversity, plenty of forests, but it's a cause of concern that around 172 animal species are threatened in India as per IUCN. We also have islands and a tropical climate with very extreme summers and winters, and an Indian monsoon. I mean, that is a very important part of our climate and also is closely related to our farming and agricultural practices. Our farming is heavily dependent on rain, and with this, that was all about the geographical part of India. We are also called the world's fastest growing economy, and we have the second largest labor force in the world. Not only that, we have a history spanning more than 4,000 years, numerous languages, religions, and a syncretic culture. Therefore, India will definitely and is already playing a key role in the future of our planet and in the fight against climate change. India is a part of various climate conferences and various pacts and agreements. It has also been a part of the Paris Agreement. And with this, let's move on to the Republic of Gilead. So, the Republic of Gilead, as I had said earlier, is a fictional authoritarian theocratic regime that takes over the United States in the novel The Handmaid's Tale. This happens after there is a civil war, and the sons of Jacob, which are basically a group of people who are interested in establishing control over Gilead from a very authoritarian kind of perspective. And you can see in the map that the map of Gilead has been superimposed on the map of US. There are various changes in it. You can see the number of regions have been reduced. There are lesser states in the US, like in this map, when in reality there are a lot of them. And there are various changes in terms of the territory as well. You can see there are blue regions, there are green, yellow, red, dark red, and pink regions. All of them have various meanings behind them, which we'll really talk about now, because that's also a very important part of the story. In reality, the US has, of course, the capital of Washington, D.C., and even the book, that is the same case. Gilead has a population of 100,000 people, and being a theocracy, it practices Christianity as its main religion. The map shows that Gilead has, the authorities of Gilead have taken over the eastern region here, where they are actually controlling the blue region. And here we have all the leaders of Gilead and their families. We also have a huge number of handmaids here. Handmaids are basically women which have been recruited or rather forced in the Gilead regime to produce children for the leaders who may not be that fertile and their wives. These women are basically kept as concubines to deliver children for them. And now you can also see the yellow regions. These regions are basically the colonies. The colonies are highly contaminated, toxic wastelands where the marginalized, people in Gilead are actually kept, and these people are basically they are told to clean up the toxic waste. There's a lot of harmful radiation, and these areas are not at all habitable for humans. But the people who are working here are actually the lowest of the low in the society. Um, we have um, we have a certain group of gender traitors as well in this area, people who do not conform to their gender and its roles. The green areas are basically another place where there's a lot of radiation, and these are nuclear sites which have nuclear power plants, I believe, which actually kind of got damaged when the civil war took place. And the dark red regions are active war zones with the US, where the US military is actually fighting with the Guardians of the Faith. The Guardians of the Faith are actually the forces of Gilead, and these are really, very active war areas where fighting is taking place at all points of time through the story. And you can see from this, you can get an overall picture of what the Republic of Gilead looks like. And I would like to quote Aunt Lydia, who is a character in the book, The Handmaid's Tale, here, because she says that the Republic of Gilead knows no bounds. Gilead is within you. This kind of actually talks about the psychological, the psychological kind of problem that is there in such regimes where they are totally interested in controlling the minds and hearts of people. And so even if you leave this place, Gilead will remain within you, and that is of course a haunting kind of a statement made by this character. Then let's move on to climate change, but before that, this is another map. This is also a map of Gilead. It is in fact more clear. In fact, you can see the blue regions. You can also read the names. We have Eastern Atlantic, East Central, Midwest, the districts, and also we have some regions in the pink. Then the yellow regions, where I had told you these are the colonies, Western, Eastern colonies, Southwest colonies, where all these people are kept to clean the wastelands and with horrifying conditions. And these are the wasteland colonies. Then these regions, the blue regions, are actually loyal to the Republic of Gilead. The pink ones are under conflict, and the dark red ones have been occupied by the rebels, or people who are, interested in kind of taking back this region from the sons of Jacob and the whole authoritarian regime and their leaders. With this, I think it's important to talk about climate change now. From this graph, you can understand that how the carbon dioxide emissions have changed over time. From this, you can see that 800,000 years ago, the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere was extremely low. It was only about 180 to 200 parts per million. This actually kept on fluctuating over time. 400,000 years ago, it rose up to 280 parts per million, but it actually never crossed this line, which is 300 parts per million, and it kept on decreasing, then increasing over time. But all of a sudden, in the 1950s, it jumped up, and now it is around 420 parts per million, and that is of course a huge change, rather rise in the carbon dioxide, you know, in the atmosphere, and that creates the whole problem around climate change. As here it says, for millennia, atmospheric carbon dioxide had never been above this line, and now we are here. This is, of course, a cause of concern and a reason why there is so much of debate on this issue, since it has actually breached this threshold. And one of the major reasons that has happened is because of the anthropogenic activities, the kind of you know things that human beings are doing to the planet. So we'll talk about that. From this, see, I want to also explain that planet Earth has an extremely sensitive climate. Even a slight change in the climate can have catastrophic impacts, and some of them have actually happened in terms of earthquakes, heat waves, floods. You know, so with this, but people often actually confuse that. They're very much confused between global warming and climate change. So I thought I'll try to clear that. So, see, the global warming is actually a long-term warming of the planet. It's happening since pre-industrial times, whereas climate change is a broader term. It's an umbrella term that includes global warming within it. And the latter actually refers to the broad range of changes happening to our planet, like rise in sea levels, shrinking of glaciers, melting of ice in Greenland, Antarctica, Arctic, shifts in the, seasons, and all these kind of things. So these are actually the consequences of warming, and the main reason behind this is the burning of fossil fuels by human beings and the harmful carbon emissions of greenhouse gases that trap heat. So this is, of course, the major meaning that is there, and both the terms can be used, like in they can be used for like explaining these things, but at the same time, there is a slight change in the meaning as well, which needs to be taken into account. And if we talk about weather and climate, then weather actually refers to the atmospheric conditions that have occurred locally over short periods of time. Example, rain, snowfall, hailstorms. But climate, on the other hand, is a long-term, regional, or even global average of temperatures, humidity, and rainfall. These are long-term patterns, and these can be seen over a longer period of time, and they can be observed and have been observed by the scientists through taking a look at the seasons, years, and decades, and taking out an average of the data and finding out how much drop or rise we have seen in the levels of heat. So these are some basic concepts about climate change which all of us should know. And here you can see there are two caricatures. One is about these are basically about two concepts, rather two sides of the climate change debate. One talks about the harmful ways in which our economies are actually not equipped to handle the climate crisis, and on the other hand, there is this blame game that is being played between the developed nations and the developing nations about who is actually responsible for the climate crisis and who should take more action to fight this off. In the first one, you can see this man. He is basically in the future, I guess, when the climate change has actually wrecked the whole world, and people have become all of a sudden they don't have proper environment to live and breathe in, and these are, I guess, the last human beings left on the planet in a way. And this man is saying, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. And this is quite true. I mean, if you look at large corporations, they don't really care about the social consequences of climate change. They are only focused on making profit, and that too at the cost of human life, which basically goes to show that how much the idea of greed is actually ingrained in our society, and we are ready to do anything to become rich and to destroy the planet. I mean, that is basically one side of this issue, which is of course a very moral side as well, because on one hand you want to become successful, you want to become rich, but on the other hand, you are somewhere caught in between the two, whether you should do the morally correct thing of saving the planet, or whether you want to become successful. But in the former case, by successful, I mean, gain profits. And, in the former case, I believe that is a very short-term way of looking at it. And the latter is, of course, a long-term way of looking at it. So we need to strike a balance between these two views. And like like here in this caricature, you can see that we have the developed nations who are basically saying we must all do something. And when we say we mean you. And the developing nations are, of course, not happy with this because the developed nations actually reached, their um, their place after quite early, compared to the developing nations. And like if you see it from like if you see it from a colonial perspective, it's quite clear that the developed nations, especially the UK, Europe, and the America, were of course very much they have gained from the colonies. In fact, their whole wealth is has been dependent on the labor of the colonies that were under their rule. And it's only now when the developing nations are also trying to progress and, help their people reach a very, good standard of living. And there has to be some sort of understanding, about that. And both these parties have to understand that they have to find more eco-friendly ways to actually go about this. This blame game is in fact delaying the progress that we are making on climate change. And one way in which they can do this is that there are certain nations in the third world which are, of course, like about to become developed, and these nations should be given some leniency, but at the same time, the developed nations should help these nations decarbonize their economies, and that can be in the form of financial help, in the form of research, development, the transfer of technology. All these things are, and these things should be on the cards. I mean, if we have to look at a sustainable future, where all of us are in harmony, both the developed and the developing nations. And the impacts of colonialism have to be really taken into account in this aspect as well. So this is another caricature which talks about how the kind of technologies that we might be building to solve the climate crisis may not be actually practical on ground, because the lives of people on ground are very, very complex, and that's because of their social circumstances. I mean, often we need to go away from the science a bit and actually look at the social aspect as well, since yeah, it's true that in science we are making so much of progress, but at the same time, whether this progress is actually translating into change on ground, that is really important to understand. Here a scientist probably is saying that this mobile app will help you in mapping and monitoring key water points, but for this lady, she is concerned that will it carry the water home, because of course climate change is also impacting people, in terms of, and here I mean especially women, they have to put in their labor to actually carry water home, and they have to walk, for long distances, and that is of course like a huge cause of concern. So for them, these kind of technologies may not be as practical, and therefore we need to find solutions that are practical to solve the climate crisis. And especially for this, we need to take a look at it from a gender, caste, and class perspective that is rooted in the ideals of climate justice. So with this, I will move on to why are we talking about gender equality in climate action? So you see, climate change increases gender inequality, and how it does that is by reducing women's ability to be financially independent. It also has an overall negative impact on the social and political rights of women, especially in economies that are highly dependent on agriculture, like India in our case. And women face higher risks and have to undergo a disproportionate burden from the impacts of climate change in situations of poverty, as the majority of the world's poorest population also includes women. So, so it's quite evident that in like in our society, like especially in India, there has been a lack of equality in the participation of women in various decision-making processes, and also in labor markets. I mean, women are very less in the formal workforce. They are in high numbers in the informal sector, but not that much in the formal sector, which translates into lack of contribution in climate-related policy making. So you see that climate change not only increases gender inequality, but it also reduces women's ability to be financially independent. And it has an overall negative impact on the social and political rights, like we just talked about. And this has also created a lot of issues in climate-related policymaking, planning, and development. And these problems have translated into poor implementation on ground. So we also need to take into the consideration that women have critical knowledge of local issues, and they are good leaders when it comes to the sustainable resource management, leading practices that are rooted in the ideas of sustainability, both at household and at the community level. As per UNFCCC, greater representation of women and other genders at political and executive level is key to solving the climate crisis. And why is this? Because it increases the responsiveness among the people. Since women are kind of more in tune with their social environment. Um, they are also key in improving the cooperation across party and ethnic lines. They are also, like very good at improving the outcomes of climate-related projects and policies. On the contrary, if these things are ignored in the policy making practices, that will actually ignore the meaningful participation of women. This will widen the gender gap, and it will also increase the inequality, and it will actually decrease the overall effectiveness of the climate change practices that we are trying to develop. Therefore, there is a need in India and across the world to implement climate policies that are gender responsive in nature. While it is true that climate change is non discriminatory and it affects everyone at some level, but it is also true that women and men, due to changes in their social roles, they both have various social roles to play, and they have to, in that case, they experience climate change in different ways, and that also has to be taken into consideration. So women have lesser access to resources. They do not have access to land finances. They do not have basic rights in terms of gaining justice. They do not have safe ways of moving, and like transport, safe transport travel. Mobility is not actually a reality for them in most of the third world nations, at least. And they also have limited voice in shaping climate related policies. And in India, only 13% of landholders are women, which, in a way is like showing us that, yes, women, since they hold less land, they are, of course, not a part of they are not taken that seriously, since, in these third world nations, the larger land that you have as, like as a person, the greater say and the greater authority you have in the society. And land is, in fact, the main aspect which actually is rooted to your status in the society. People with more land are also the people who are more respected in our society. So females are more likely, in when there is a natural disaster, females are more likely to be killed by that, or are or they are systematically killed at a younger age. That's true for India and various other nations like India, where there is widespread female feticide. Where women are killed even before they are born, in the womb. So that is also another cause of concern. So according to World Water Development Report 2020, 80% of people that have been displaced by climate change are women. Women also have lesser access to climate information, which will help them in, the adaptation. But that is not happening since they do not have the access to that information. In India, 79% of women are engaged in agriculture, as against 63% of men, and that has been, that is according to the data that is 2011 data, which says that. So men in India are actually less when it comes to the farming workforce, and there are more women in it, and these women really lack the climate information that is required for them to do farming in a more eco-friendly and sustainable manner. Men in India are moving towards non-farming occupations. They're leaving behind women to work in fields. They're made to do physical work and have to be dependent on men to get information on new sustainable farming practices and climate information. This dependence is what puts them at risk, and that is something which we need to understand. Also, if you look at the fact that in the aftermath of cyclones and earthquakes, when the houses are damaged, women are forced into prostitution, and they are also forced to earn money and help in feeding their families. And this actually happened in 2009 when there was a cyclone in West Bengal. The women from Sundarbans, an area in India which lies in West Bengal. The women of these regions had to move to red light areas in Kolkata, where they were forced into prostitution, and they also like experienced a lot of stress due to this. This actually calls for greater gender equality in climate change movements, discourses, knowledge production, and at all levels. Therefore, I think that is why it's extremely important that we talk about gender equality in climate action. Margaret Atwood also had said that those who deny the existence of climate change are also the same people who deny rights to women and some other minority groups, forcing them into a depraved life. It has been, like there have been so many reports that nations with more female politicians pass more ambitious climate policies. Um, Such kind of, detailed research has been done by a professor, there's an economics professor in Australia who actually went on to study um, the parliaments of around 91 countries, and she came out with this clear linkage that greater female leadership will of course lead to better climate policies. Therefore, with this, we should also talk about women's triple burden. What this actually means, well, women's triple burden is basically a reality in all parts of the world, but more so in India. Women have the triple burden of doing paid work, doing housework which is not paid for, and also giving some emotional support to their family members. And with that, this puts a triple burden on women, which is also a major reason for their disadvantaged position in society. And that is what this shows. I mean, in the picture also you can see like a woman is not only she is not only going to do work and make a career for herself, but she's also actually forced into taking up some other jobs, like taking care of her family. That is actually not something which she has a choice over. She has to do it. She has to take care of her family, her kids, her husband. She has to cater to the emotional needs of all these people in the family, and that is the triple burden, which is also a contributing factor in the status of women if we look at it in the climate change movement. So if we look at climate change, particularly in India, the first the climate change over Indian region report that was released by Ministry of Earth Sciences warns of tropical cyclones, thunderstorms, heat waves, floods, and droughts in India, and these will increase till we have sound policies and mayors that can actually stop these things. But you can't really stop these things from happening. I mean, you have to adapt, but these policies are lacking in that key aspect of adaptation. So when it comes to the temperature, the surface air temperature over India has risen by 0.6 degrees Celsius per year since 1901. When it comes to rainfall, precipitation has become more erratic. Like in some places, in some places it is increasing, in others it is not. And there are cases of extreme rainfall, which also has a troubling impact on the farming, in the farming sector. And then if you look at floods, flood risks are higher over the eastern coast of India. The Himalayan flood basins are projected to greater floods due to faster glacial and snow melting. When we talk about tropical cyclones, we recently have had so many tropical cyclones. I mean, each year we have at least one or two tropical cyclones in India, and storm-like conditions that have increased post 1950s in both the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. By the end of the century, Hindu Kush Himalayas, which is the Himalayan range, are projected to be warmer by 2.6 to 4.6 degrees Celsius. This is actually some of the key problems that we are facing in India when it comes to climate change. And of course, these things are actually impacting the people on ground in various ways. So let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale and climate change. Here I have a quote basically. This has been taken from the book, which basically says that stillbirths, miscarriages, and genetic deformities were widespread and on the increase, and this trend has been linked to the various nuclear power accidents, shutdowns, and incidents of sabotage that characterized this period. Here, they're basically talking about the kind of reasons that were there behind the emergence of the kind of things that happened in The Handmaid's Tale and the Republic of Gilead, as well as leakages from chemical and biological warfare stockpiles and toxic waste disposal sites. In some instances, these materials were simply dumped into the sewage system and to the uncontrolled use of chemical insecticides, herbicides, and other sprays. This actually gives you a small picture of the kind of problems that were plaguing the society, and that is the reason there was a civil war, and the sons of Jacob were interested in reversing these problems, and they were, trying to decarbonize the society, and that too in a very totalitarian and strict manner. So here we have an infographic which talks about some facts about the Republic of Gilead. You can see that there were 1 in 5 women who were fertile, and the sons of Jacob took over the US government to fix the infertility problem with the solution of going back to simpler times and getting rid of modern day sins. Thus, the Republic of Gilead was created. And there are various characters in the story. So one of them, who is a leader in this regime, he says that we wanted to make the world better, but better never means better for everyone. It always means worse for some. And these are the kind of ideas that Margaret Atwood has explored. Then here you can see that in Gilead there is a hierarchy, and men are at the top of this hierarchy, and women are only, playing the role of caregivers. They are only treated they are only viewed for their bodies, and they do not have any sexual autonomy. They are basically dependent on the men for everything. They are not even taught to read and write. And for the economy, the handmaids are Gilead's most important export. That basically shows that for them, the female body is like a commodity. It has no real importance. It is only seen for its use and practical use. And that is some of the things that are there in the story. Um, then this is also uh, you know like a part from the book which talks about how the regime in Gilead is actually committed to a decarbonized economic model with a goal of significantly lowering and eventually eliminating emissions. Much of its economy is centered around slave labor, specifically its food sources, and there is much mention of the agricultural colonies where prisoners are sent to do farm work. And of course, we know that this slave labor and farm work are actually done in those regions that we had talked about, the yellow regions that are called the colonies, where people who are marginalized are sent to do labor work in harmful conditions. Here, I would also like to read some notes from the book, itself. Um, these these kind of these points were actually discussed during the proceedings of the 12th Symposium on Gileadian Studies, which was held as part of the International Historical Association Convention. This is an organization mentioned in the historical notes of the book on page number 307. Basically, this academic conference is happening somewhere in the future, where where it is believed that from that I can like understand that the ruling of the authorities in Gilead actually comes to an end, and post this regime, we have like somewhere in the future they're actually trying to look at it from an academic perspective, somewhere like we are also doing it in this presentation right now. And in this, they talk about the various things that they have found from that time, and they try to create a story from that about what would have happened to those women, to people in Gilead, and they talk about various things, that were happening during that time. And they do talk about births, miscarriages, genetic deformities, which were widespread and on the increase. And they also talk about the racist policies that were, there during that time in Gilead. And these historical notes are, a great source of understanding the Gilead society. Now let's talk about the the major differences and similarities between Gilead and India. So you see that let's take a look first. Gilead is a totalitarian regime, and it actually consists of they have various differences when it comes to India, of course. So Gilead has an inner party of men known as the committee that are in charge. Like it is an basically an oligarchic republic that is having a small group of people that control the country. So, but on the other hand, India is a democratic republic having a parliamentary democracy. The leaders in India at all levels are actually selected through popular vote. Gilead is also a theocracy. There is, a full emphasis on Christianity as the main religion. But India, on the other hand, is a secular democracy. We have multiple faiths, and all of them are given equality before law. Also, Gilead is on the last stage of demographic transition that basically highlights low birth rates and low death rates, whereas India is on stage two of demographic transition with high birth rates and low death rates. The very important characteristic of last stage of demographic transition is that there is high standard of living. People have access to good medical facilities. There is almost no poverty. There is widespread, and technology is like very much in, like it has gone into the society and people have access to technology. Whereas in the case of India, we still have a lot of poverty, and we are gradually moving towards becoming a developed nation. So we are still in stage two. And when it comes to access to healthcare as well, that is still not as effective in India, and especially the lower levels in the rural areas, especially. So these are some of the key, differences. And moving on, Gilead is of course a well-developed country since there was a civil war, and it was actually U.S. that was taken over, and it turned into Gilead. Whereas India is still a developing country, and we still have a lot of catching up to do. Also, Gilead is a centralized government, whereas India has we have a central state level government system with village and block level. We have block level, village level, state level, district level ways of planning and development. We have elections at all these levels, whereas in Gilead there is a proper centralization of government and also a centralization of power, which is true for the authoritarian regimes. Also, Gilead has suspended fundamental civil and human rights. There is no freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion and assembly in Gilead, whereas in India, all these freedoms are still enjoyed by the people. Each and every citizen is guaranteed some fundamental rights like right to equality, freedom of speech, right against exploitation, freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, and that is a major difference. Therefore, at the administrative level, there are many differences in how both the regions work. But when we look at, then we also need to talk about that leaders of Gilead are actually a part of an extremist Christian cult. These people are very much, they believe the Bible is the gospel, and for them, the scriptures, whatever they say, are completely infallible, and that is true for the authoritarian regimes. Whereas in India's case, we of course have various religions, and everyone has the freedom to express themselves through those religions. And that is also to say that in Gilead, religion is in fact used as a weapon to dominate and oppress women. And in India, that has not been the case, throughout India, but in some communities that has been the case in the past, and that is also going through gradual change. And now, the eighth point, you can see that in Gilead there is discrimination of education between boys and girls, and that's because in Gilead girls are not allowed to read and write, whereas in India there is free and compulsory education, and that is a fundamental that is a fundamental right for each and every child, irrespective of its gender, caste, and class. So that is there. Now, if we talk about the similarities, then first of all, Gilead has a patriarchal society where only men have access to higher education, and only they can hold positions of importance in political, economical, and cultural roles. They have the right to property, job, and political practice, unlike women. India is also a patriarchal society that is highly male dominated, but it is not as extreme like Gilead. Women in India are not denied the opportunity to reach higher positions in the society, but it is often the cultural norms, circumstances, familial attitudes, and access to education that will decide, how far a woman can reach up to what men have been enjoying since the beginning. India also has very matriarchal and egalitarian systems in some regions, former in urban areas, and latter in certain communities in South and Northeastern India, and especially in tribes. Yet, in majority of the country, women are accustomed to years of patriarchal conditioning to fulfill their gender and social roles, and are also expected to follow them, even if they have a career, in front of them. So, from this, you can understand that the Indian women do not take full advantage of their, they are not able to take full advantage of their constitutional rights because they are not properly aware and even informed about them. And in some cases, they lack financial knowledge. There is poor utilization of voting rights by women and lack of political awareness. This all stems from the fact that these things are actually kept from them, like in the family as a unit. Women are often not encouraged to be informed on these issues. And so, I mean, if you look at the population also, numerically, there are few women in India compared to men, which is 933 to 1,000. And these traditions have continued for so long that women have become accustomed to these things. So these are some of the similarities. I mean, also we have to talk about female feticide, infanticide, which basically means that there is poor care of female infants, especially in rural India. I mean, if you look at some practices like the dowry is a practice where when a woman gets married in India, her family is supposed to give uh, some money and some kind of things like as gifts to her husband's family, and this is kind of seen as a commodification of the practice of marriage where women are kind of sold into marriage. I mean, the man's family is expected to like accept the money and the gifts uh, for taking care of the daughter. So these are some questionable practices that are happening in India. There is, of course, preference for male children. Even in rich states like Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, and Maharashtra, there is widespread sex selective abortion. There is poor law enforcement in terms of women's safety, and women have a lower marriageable age. Then also, the problems with caste and class also have a role to play in this. Women who belong to lower castes are more disadvantaged compared to women who belong to the upper caste. And in there are so many other instances where in the Hindu religion there has been a lot of progress made when it comes to gender equality and reforms, but still we have a long way to go. Therefore, at society and class level, the two regions are quite similar. And Gilead has a society that has been divided on various class levels. And here I'm going to talk about the class, caste, and gender hierarchies that are there in Gilead and India. And we'll also talk about the ones that are present in US. We'll try to compare them. So if you look at the hierarchy, then on top we have men, basically the commander, um, who is basically the highest class folk in the regime, and they have access to everything. The commander is basically the dictator of this regime in a way. And there's not one commander; there are a group of commanders. So that's also true. And then there is the wives. In wives also we have a classification. We have one set of people that are simply the wives, and then we have the econo wives. So wives are the high class wives of the commanders, whereas the econo wives are the low class wives of guardians or the soldiers that are there in the guardians of faith, which is the army of Gilead. Then we have so these are basically the econo people. They are having more advantages in society. They are more rich. They can keep many liberties. They are much more privileged. But when it comes to the econo wives, they have a lesser rank than men, and women in general in the society have a lesser standing. So that is all about commanders, wives, and econo wives. Then we need to talk about the children. So in children, we have various rights for them in terms of education for boys and girls. Girls are not allowed to read and write. They are not encouraged to marry after turning and like they are not encouraged to marry when they are young, but they are encouraged to marry when they turn into an adult, especially when they have their first period. And with this, there is, of course, a greater focus on female classes. And female are in general, as called as the lesser sex in the storyline. Their main purpose is to bear children, and even if like if there is a family and both there is maybe some problem, some fertility issues with the male, it is the female who will be blamed in either of the cases. And that is quite true in India as well. The whole burden of producing children and fertility comes on to the women. And when it comes to the econo wives, they have no real power. Then we also have another category of women called aunts. Aunts are basically tasked to oversee the handmaids, the daughters, and the gender traitors, which are basically the widows, nuns, and women who do not fulfill the role that has been expected of them. The handmaids are the main, the central focus in the story, since their main job is actually to procreate, and that is what they are seen for. And the aunts are the ones who are actually being and they are also females, so they are the ones who are tasked to keep all these marginalized women under check, whether that is the marthas, who are basically the servants in the houses of the commanders, and the econo wives. And also the aunts actually enjoy more power compared to the wife of the commander as well. And since the aunts are actually responsible for making sure that the baby production process in this regime happens smoothly, there are no issues, and everyone does whatever work they are told to do properly. Here, I would like to quote a passage from the book, which will highlight the role of the aunts. Um, so it says that Gilead was, although undoubtedly patriarchal in form and very occasionally matriarchal in content, like some sectors of the social fabric that gave rise to it. As the architects of Gilead knew, to institute an effective totalitarian system, or indeed any system at all, you must offer some benefits and freedoms, at least to a privileged few, in return for those you remove. And these freedoms, of course, you can see that the higher you go up in the hierarchy, the more freedoms and privileges you can have. In this connection, a few comments upon the crack female control agency known as the aunts is perhaps in order. So basically, Judd, according to the Limkin material, was of the opinion from the outset that the best and most cost effective way to control women for reproductive and other purposes was through women themselves. For this, there were many historical precedents. In fact, no empire imposed by force or otherwise has ever been without this feature, control of the marginalized by members of their own group. And that was quite true in the British Empire also, because most of the forces in the British Empire, when it was in India, when India was its colony, most of the forces actually were consisting of the Indian soldiers themselves, who were in a way, kind of were in charge of imposing order on people of their own backgrounds. So that is quite true. And in the case of Gilead, there were many women willing to serve as aunts, either because of a genuine belief in what they call traditional values, or for the benefits they might thereby acquire. And when power is scarce, of course, a little of it is very tempting. And that is the basic philosophy behind the role of aunts in the society of Gilead. These were women who were put in charge of controlling other women. And even in Indian society, that's quite true. I mean, we don't really talk about it that often, but patriarchy works both ways. Sometimes even women are the ones who are actually, spreading these effects of patriarchy in the form of, especially in marriages. But that is, of course, at a lower level. That is, of course, at a rural level. And these women are the ones who, especially the mother-in-laws and the women of older generation, not in all cases, but in some cases, are the ones that actually put a lot of control on the younger women in the family and their reproductive rights and their sexuality, how they and their whole bodily autonomy. So that is quite true in this case as well. And this is another pyramid which shows the hierarchy of various women in the Gileadian society, wives, aunts, marthas, handmaids, econowives, and the lowest of the lowest, the gender traitors. And then we have another pyramid here, which is of the Indian caste system. So Indian caste system, of course, it is now, like, if we look at it from the constitutional perspective, it is not allowed anymore. The Indian caste system, and especially the practice of untouchability, which was meant towards the Dalits, which were considered to be like a lower caste of people in India, especially in ancient times. This practice is, of course, not legal anymore. It is not allowed in India, but in some cases, it has still survived to this day. So according to this pyramid, there are various groups which are called the castes. There is Brahmins, which are on the top. This is the priestly caste. Then we have Kshatriyas, which is the warrior ruler caste, and subsequently we have Vaishyas, which were the artisans and tradesmen, Shudras that were manual laborers, and Dalits, uh, you know, which were considered as the ones who do street cleaning and menial tasks. So this is a very rigid way of classifying various people in the society, and according to this system, it was your birth will actually determine what work you'll do in your life. So if you're born at so if you're born in each of these kind of families or people, like if you're born to these families, whether you are a Brahmin or Kshatriya, you will have to pertain to the role that has been assigned to your caste. And this is a very rigid, a very controversial, and extremely dehumanizing system that was prevailing in India for a long time. And somewhere it has still survived to this day. And that is also, like a look at the hierarchies that are there in our present day society. So, of course, in The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood has done an excellent job of portraying another hierarchy. And this one is, of course, particularly about women. Within these castes also, the women of lower castes were in fact even treated, worse than the men of these lower castes. So women, of course, held a secondary position even when it comes to their caste, even within their own caste. So that is the kind of fragmentation that was taking place. In US, we have various social classes. There is the upper class, upper middle class, working class, lower class. And in Indian families, we have a hierarchy as well. The patriarch, which is the eldest male in the family, he is the one who is responsible for making all the decisions, whether financial or some other. And then the second is the eldest female, which is probably his wife or his mother. In some cases, there are women who are the leaders of the family in India.